Amen. We've been looking at a story about this little town called Bethlehem, looking at what we all desire and what we all seek, which is hope. We've been talking about this issue and topic of hope. We're going to ask you this morning to turn to Ruth chapter 4. Someone asked me before the first service, said, so what's going to be the Christmas message this year? And I said, we're going to look 1,100 years before the Christmas story, at the original Christmas story here at the end of the book of Ruth, Ruth chapter 4. If you would turn there, we've been in this journey through the book of Ruth. We'll kind of highlight and kind of bring you up to speed as to where we're at in this story. But yesterday, last night, there was kind of a revelation that happened for me, and it had to do with my wife. I don't know about you, but if you're married here, you're probably married to, there's kind of one of three people, but probably one of two people. Because let's be honest, sometimes women can be somewhat picky, right? Men? Don't answer, all right? Don't answer it. You know exactly what they want because they tell you 6 months beforehand. Here's what I want. Here's what you need to get me. Here's how you're going to do it. And we say, yes, ma'am, and we get on it. There's others of you, you're like me. I'm married to a great woman. She's not picky. In fact, one of the things I don't like about this season is trying to figure out what to get her. Because I'll ask her, I'll say, hey, babe, what would you like? And she'll say, well, I got everything I want, and I just love being together. And it's like, no, just tell me what you want. Just give me something here. Like, don't leave me empty-handed. Just tell me, I'll go get it. Just give me specifics. And it's always like this mysterious, and she really does mean it. She doesn't care, she doesn't care if she gets anything. It's nothing to her. And so every year it's like this mystery of trying to figure out how to get her to say what she liked to have. And so I usually get the boys involved and be like, all right, guys, today your job is to get one hint, at least for me, of what she would like to have. And it's like this mystery. And so she's trying. I mean, she's not picky. She's actually kind of somewhat ambiguous about what to get her. And so I don't know about you, but guys, I'm the type, give me what you want. I'll go in the store and I'll get it. I might get a few extra things I like, but I'll get it. And so when I get a list, I'll get right what's on that list unless I see something I like, and I'll get that. And so give me the list. That's what I want. And so every year we go through this kind of cycle of what would you like for Christmas? Well, Dave, I don't really need anything. Don't get me anything. I'm not getting you anything. So we go through this cycle, and we kind of laugh about it. Well, last night it hit me that the last 3 years, this mystery happened, and we went through this same cycle. And I would get her something, put it under the tree. Her parents would come up, and they would visit on Christmas Day, and they would bring a gift. And she would open the gift, and for the past 3 years, it's no joke, she can attest, for the past 3 years, my in-laws and me have gotten my wife the exact same gift. No lie, this is no joke. So I had a great conversation with my in-laws, and I said, what are you getting her? Yeah, make sure I'm not getting her. In fact, I kind of played around with them, and they said it. I was like, oh, is that what you're getting? Are you serious? I just bought that for her. And, I kind of played around, and we laughed about it. For the last 3 years, we have gotten the same exact gift. But last night, there was a revelation. And here's a revelation. As I looked at Allison and said, Allison, just tell me, what are we using? Is it my gifts, or is it your parents' gifts? So like last year, my wife, she's practical. My wife said, you know what I really need? After we got through this, the boys figured out, she really is asking for a crock pot. She wants one of those big ones that you can cook for 6. And you could have it on, and that way it's enough food for everybody. And so I went out and I got, the big crock pot that had the extra power on it to go, you plug it in, it just goes, lights come on and stuff. I got the good crock pot. The year before that, she wanted I know it sounds simple, but there are some other things I got her too. I don't want you to think I'm that hapless. But anyway, she wanted a toaster that you could put toast in it. Pretty much a whole family could have toast in one button. All right, she wanted that. And so I went out and looked for the toaster that had, it could, different types of bread. It could fit them all in there all at the same time, push the buttons, and you got like 10 pieces. I went out and bought that. Well, here to find out, last night it hit me because I asked her, I said, hey, which ones are we using? Just curious. Was it mine? Because I don't even remember. And she's like, well, actually, remember you took that one back. And she said, I still have the crock pot. It's in a box in the closet. And I'm like, are you serious? Every gift, none of the gifts that I bought her we're using. It's her mom and dad's gift. And so the stirring of the Christmas season just has me, and so we were laughing last night about this and about how why were my presents rejected and your parents aren't. Why is that? You're married to me now. We came to the conclusion that because it was easier for me to take mine back, and so we're going to probably regift some of them. So if you get a crock pot from us, you know where it has come from. This story in Ruth chapter 4 is a lot like that. It's this idea of kind of finality, putting the pieces together. And in reality, this is exactly the story we're looking at, is about a family that lost something, but in return gains double, gains something else. We see this kind of prize being played out. And here in Ruth chapter 4, we're going to see the end of this story. But let me bring you up to speed in case you've missed it. We began this story in a town called Bethlehem. Yeah, the same town that Jesus was born in. Bethlehem, the house of bread. And while there, we got this story focused on a single family in that town. That family was the family of Elimelech. We saw the names of that family. Elimelech, which name means my God is king, had a wife named Naomi. Naomi's name means sweet or buttercup. It's a pet name. And so he called her Buttercup, sweetness. That was her name. They had two sons, a family of four. They had two sons. The name of the first son was Mahlon, and the name of the second son was Chilion. And we kept saying, listen, don't name your sons those names because it means sick and death. You don't name your son sickness. You don't name your son death. And so they had this family. Well, what happened in Bethlehem was that there was a famine. There was a famine all over Israel. And the reason why there was a famine, we found out, is because this story was happening, what was called during the time of the Judges, was happening during the period of the Judges. This was one of the darkest periods in Israel's history. Israel was wicked, rebellious, obstinate, and this brought on an unfortunate response from God. God judged them by raising up foreign lands to come in and take them captive. And so if you read the book of Judges, it says they didn't have a king, and God continued to judge them over and over and over again. And this story is happening during that time. So when we read chapter 1 of Ruth, we find a famine in Bethlehem all throughout Israel, and we find most likely that's happening because of judgment. And so Elimelech makes a business decision. He says, I can stay in Bethlehem, this place called House of Bread that now is parched and dry and not producing, or I could take my family and provide for them. And so he makes a decision to go to the land of Moab. If you remember when we were looking at the story, we talked about Moab. Moab was a wicked nation. Moab was to the east of Israel. And there in Moab, it says they were not accepted by the Israelites. In fact, they were enemies of Israel. But they go there. Elimelech takes his family and goes to Moab. They were there for about 10, 12 years. It doesn't say exactly. We know they're there for over 10 years. And their two sons come of age to take wives, and they take two wives that are Moabite women. This was commanded by God not to do. And so they take these wives. Ruth and Orpah are their names. And then we see tragedy happen in chapter 1. First of all, we see the father Elimelech dying. Then we see the two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, dying. So here we have a family. They left a famine, went to a land that had food, and while there, the men die. And we see a widow left with her two widowed daughter-in-laws who are Moabite. And so she hears finally that there is now food in Bethlehem, and she decides to go back to Bethlehem. While going back to Bethlehem, she stops because, of course, on any journey, women are going to talk. And so they stop and they're talking. That was supposed to be a joke. You can laugh. I know everybody's Christmas craze, but you can laugh a little bit this morning. As they're talking, Naomi says to her daughter-in-laws, listen, daughter-in-laws, I love you, but go back to your homeland. Go back to your people. Go back to your gods. There's nothing for you. In fact, we see there in chapter 1, she says to them, I have no hope. There's no hope. There's no hope for you in Bethlehem. You're not going to be accepted. I've got no children. You're not going to have husbands. No one's going to want you. There's nothing. Orpah turns and goes back. Her one daughter-in-law goes back. But Ruth, it says, clings to her. And Ruth has this beautiful statement in chapter 1, where you will go, I will go. Where you will lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die. We see this beautiful statement, and Ruth clings to Naomi and goes back to Bethlehem. While back in Bethlehem, remember, Naomi renames herself. Her name was Sweet, but she renames herself Mara, which means bitter. She says, I am bitter in this place because of the loss that happened in Moab. In chapter 2, we see this woman, Ruth, this Moabite young lady, getting a job. Excuse me. She goes out to a field to glean. We talked about this gleaning process. Gleaning was actually getting the leftovers, that they would allow foreigners to come into the field after the gleaners would pick the crop, and the gleaners could then pick leftovers. And so we see Ruth grabbing leftovers. At that point, no hope. She was just getting some food for her family. The famine had lifted, and now Bethlehem was producing food again. While they're on the job, we see these words. And it just so happened that there was a man who comes by. Remember that man's name? The man's name was Boaz. And at the end, we find that Boaz is a kinsman redeemer. This is huge. This is the crux of the story, is that now there was hope because of redemption. This guy, Boaz, was able to redeem. Let me explain redemption. The word redemption literally means to buy back. Now remember Ruth. Ruth was already married. She had already been bought, so to speak, by her original husband. But because her husband died, there was a law in Israel that a Jewish man would then have a relative buy his property and buy his wife, buy back all that he had. And so it was a way to carry on the name of the deceased person. So it was called redemption. It was called the kinsman redeemer. Originally, by the way, redemption was connected to POW. A POW who would be, they would negotiate a price to release a POW. That's the idea of redemption. And so this was a family member who could redeem the property and goods of someone who had died in their family. So if you lost a family member, if your uncle passed away and you were the next in line in that family, you could then redeem it for yourself. That's this idea of a kinsman redeemer. And so we find there's a man, Boaz. The question was he willing? He was clearly able. But was he willing? So we go on and we see at the end of chapter 2 this excitement and this opportunity, and hope begins to rise. And we begin chapter 3 with a plan. Naomi, who had just been bitter, now comes up with a plan. She strategizes. She says to Ruth, listen, there's this man. He's able, but we got to make sure he's willing. And so here's what I want you to go down. I want you to lay at his feet. And I want you to cover up with his blanket. Now that sounds creepy. We talked about this last week. But what she was actually doing was kind of throwing herself onto him to be redeemed. This was acceptable. She was saying, listen, just like this cover covers me up, will you cover me? Will you take me under your wings as my redeemer? It was a question. It was a question mark. It was acceptable in their culture. And so she does that. And at the end of chapter 3, we see that he was able and he was willing to redeem Ruth. But there's a little hiccup into the plan because there was another man who is closer in relation. Remember that? And so now we've got this dilemma. We left off in chapter 3 and it was like, da-da-da, what's going to happen? And we're wondering. Now, granted, hopefully you were able to go home and read this story, but it leaves us wondering what in the world is going to happen here. It leaves us on the edge of our seat. It's like an episode of 24, okay? And it leaves you on the edge, and what's going to take place, and is this going to work out? And we're left wondering. And we come to chapter 4, and we see this idea, this possible hiccup in the story of romance and redemption, and now we see what God is going to do. Now, don't worry, for those of you that love Christmas, we're going to get to the Christmas story. This is the precursor to the Christmas story. Take a look at chapter 4, verse 1. Now Boaz, he was the one who was able and willing, had gone up to the gate and sat down. Now, let me explain what's happening. The city gate was a place where people would gather to make decisions. In fact, the elders of a city, the leaders of a city would meet at the city gate and they would advise people and they would talk about negotiations. They would talk about prices. They would talk about government. They would talk about deals that needed to be made. This was the place where people gathered to talk about the happenings of their area. In fact, the elders of the city would give advice to people and judge people there at the city gate. So here Boaz goes down. He wants to redeem Ruth. He goes down to the city gate. By the way, in our culture, this is like making it a deal at Panera. I mean, people around here, when you talk about, hey, where do you want to meet? You want to sit down and talk about something? It's always like, hey, let's meet at Panera. I don't know why it's Panera, but everybody goes to Panera. Or Starbucks if you have that much money. They go to Starbucks. Or like me, let's go to Sheetz, all right? I'll get a little bonus from Mike Weber, who manages Sheetz in Morgansville, if you go there especially, okay? That's a good Sheetz. So here they are going to the city gate with a purpose. Boaz has a purpose. His purpose is redemption. Take a look at what happens. And behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. Stop right here. Do you remember as we've been journeying through the book of Ruth, and you're here and you haven't journeyed with us, here's what happens all the way through this small power-packed book is we see over and over again these words, and it happens, and it happens. It's happenstance. What we find is God is behind the scenes moving these things. And we've talked about the providence of God and the sovereignty of God in his working. That God's sovereignty is that he is over all things. Now, lest you're here and you ask questions, we've said this very clearly. God is behind all things that are good, right? Even the evil that happens in the world, God is working good in that. God's sovereignty is wrapped in his goodness. You can't differentiate those two things. And so God is behind the scenes. And when we see the word behold all the way through the Bible, it means stop and look. It's like the flashing yellow sign saying, look, look, look. It just so happens while Boaz is sitting at the gate in a city of hundreds of thousands of people, possibly hundreds of thousands of people, at least 50, 60,000 people in Bethlehem, it just so happens that the other man who can redeem comes by. God? Anybody see God in that? So it just so happens this guy comes by. And so Boaz says to him, turn aside, friend. Sit down here. And he turns aside and he sits down. And he takes 10 men of the elders of the city. And that day, 10 men who were elders could witness a deal happening. Later on in Jesus' day, it became 8 men. You see Jesus referencing this in the Gospels, this idea of 8 men who were witnesses. 10 men here in the Old Testament. He took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they sat down, and he said to the Redeemer, he said, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one beside you to redeem it, and I have come after you. Now here's the deal. So he comes up to this man, he sees him at the city gate, and he says, hey, relative, friend, here's the deal. Our relative Elimelech has died, and his wife Naomi has a piece of property she's getting rid of, and you and I get a chance to redeem it. Do you want the land? It's free. You pay a small fee, you got the property, you pay the price, it's yours, and it's much cheaper than buying any other land. Now remember, when we started this book, we talked about that land ownership was everything. In chapter 2, when we come to Boaz, land ownership was everything in Israel. By the way, it used to be everything in our culture, didn't it? If you own land, you got it all. In their day, it was the same. If you own land, you got everything. And so here he is saying, listen, there's land, do you want it? Notice the response of this man. He doesn't delay. He doesn't question it. What does he say? I will redeem it. Give me the land. I'm going to put some crops on there. I put some cattle on there. It's going to expand my 401k. It will be my retirement plan. There it is. Now, but notice what Boaz says, verse 5. Then Boaz says to him, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, though, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. Verse 6, then the Redeemer says, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it. Folks, what changed between verse 5 and verse 6? Ruth. What changed the deal? I mean, he was there with his calculator and he's looking at the land and he says, all right, if I pay that, I get the land, I add to my name, my inheritance expands, my grandkids can build their houses on that land. I mean, this is a good deal. I mean, this is going to make me rich. I'm putting Boaz Towers there, right? And then he hears this side note, this little deal, right? He says, wait. There's a behind-the-scenes deal, though. If you take the land, you also have to take Ruth the Moabite as your wife. Problem. All of a sudden, he looks at the calculator, and he's like, she's a Moabite, right? Moabites aren't accepted in Israel. Moabites would make you look bad because they're an enemy of Israel. This Moabite woman, why would I want her? In fact, this is so keen that he actually says, I cannot take it or it will impair my inheritance. You know what he's saying there? He's saying it will hurt my name. It will hurt the inheritance I already have if I take this woman who is unacceptable, who is not part of the Jewish people. She says, no way you can have it. It shows the way they looked at Moabites here, doesn't it? The fact that he would not take the land knowing it would cause him to lose inheritance, somehow his reputation would be hurt. And so he makes a Christmas calculation and he says, I can't afford it. My inheritance won't allow me. You can have it. You notice what happens? He reads the fine print and he says, no deal. No deal. Now, I remember the first time I learned about this idea of the fine print. I was around 8 or 9 years old. And I remember as a kid, I really loved cereal. And I loved Captain Crunch. And even today, one of my favorites is the Fruity Bites. They're the cheap brand of Fruity Pebbles. We get the cheap brand, Fruity Bites. I love those things. I mean, we have them in the house. My wife buys them for me. And she'd go to the store and I'd be like, hey, don't forget Fruity Bites. Don't forget Fruity Bites, right? And that's me. I'll say that to her. And so we all have our little cereals, and for me, Fruity Bites. But I remember the first time I learned about the fine print of things. I was 8 or 9 years old, and on the front of my Captain Crunch box, and I especially like Captain Crunch with the berries in them. That was always good. I can't remember what they're called, but they're really, Crunch berries, yeah. And I remember they had a car on the front, and there was a car. Man, it looked real. It was a race car. It was a sporty type race car thing. And I looked at it, and it said, "Get a car." And it said, here's how you do it. You have to have 10 boxes, and you have to cut off the serial numbers, and you send it in, and they send you a car. Now, in my 8-year-old mind, I thought with absolute certainty that if I cut off the end of these boxes, and I saved them, listen, we're talking about, I think it was 10, it may have been like 8, but if I had 10 of them, proof of purchases, I mean, you get a car. So in my mind, I'm thinking, that's a lot of boxes, that's a lot of cereal. Man, this is going to be a real car. I was convinced that if I sent in 10, I was getting an actual car. And my thought was my mom could drive it around until I'm 16. She could drive in the sports car, and then at 16, I'm taking over, and I got myself a sports car. And so I remember saving up. I'm having my mom write the letter, send it in. She had no clue I was thinking that. Her thought was, he knows he's getting an inch-long car. And I never will forget the package coming in the mail. And even to that day, it didn't hit me. I remember opening up the package and thinking that there was going to be keys to the car. And I opened up the package, and there was a Matchbox sports car. And I don't remember exactly how I reacted, but I do remember one thing. There were some tears in my eyes. I was heartbroken. And that I ate that much cereal to get nothing. And I remember my mom saying to me, Dave, that was just to get this car. You're not going to get a real car from eating Crunch berries, all right? I thought it was a great deal, and I ate a lot of Crunch berries. So, but I remember I learned, and I remember my mom saying, I remember saying this word to her. I said, Mom, it said on the box I get a car. They lied to me. And she says, no, you got to read the fine print, son. You got to read the fine print. It was the first time I had come face to face with the fine print. Here's the man, right? The man comes, there's land. You want the land? Sure. Well, you got to read the fine print, buddy. The fine print says you get the land, but you also get the Moabite wife. He says, no deal, no thank you. I'm not taking that. The fine print will not work with my inheritance. Now, notice what happens, verse 7. Now, this was a custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it yourself, he drew off his sandal. Now, what's interesting, I'll just give you a little insight. If you want to see where this plays out, it actually is seen in Deuteronomy chapter 25. But the rule is, if you don't redeem someone that you can redeem, something you can redeem for your family, if you don't redeem it, it actually says that you take the shoe off and you hit them in the face with it. I think deals would go down much better in our culture if we continued some of these traditional things, right? Like you make a deal with somebody and it doesn't go very well and you take off their shoe and you put the Nike across their face. That's the way deals are going to be kept, right? And that's the way they did it. By the way, do you remember years ago, President George W. Bush was in the Middle East and a guy threw his shoe at him. Do you remember that? This still happens in some cultures, this idea of the shoe being seen as an insult. And so this was seen as an insult in Deuteronomy 25. That had through the years changed. Remember, this was the time of the judges, so they weren't following God's commands very well. And so here the deal had changed to where now if you make the deal, if you redeem something, you give your shoe to the person who's redeeming it. So here's the Redeemer giving this up, saying, no, you can take Ruth, you can take the property. Here's my shoe. So here we got Boaz. He now has real estate. He now has Ruth as his wife, and he's got a Reebok. He's got everything, right? He's now redeemed it all for himself. Now follow what happens. Then Boaz said to the elders, verse 9, and all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day. Then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming to your house like Rachel and Leah. They're saying, hey, may she have a lot of children. That was the custom in Israel. May they have a lot of children to continue the name of God, who together built up the house of Israel. And may you, Boaz, act worthily in Ephrathah, the old name of Bethlehem, and be known. May your name be known in Bethlehem, and may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. By the way, that was another kinsman redeemer relationship, and they used that as a statement of redeeming, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this woman. Verse 13, so Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. If we stop the story here, we have probably one of the best love stories in all of the Bible, right? I mean, here is a woman who's a Moabite, rejected. Boaz redeems her, and now she's his wife. But here's the problem. The problem is, so we begin the story with a funeral, we end the story with a wedding. Great, grand, wonderful. Show it on the Hallmark Channel, all right? The problem is, in the Jewish custom, and if we stop the story here, Ruth is not yet fully redeemed. Let me explain. Just her having a husband doesn't redeem her. The requirement for her to be redeemed is that she has to produce a child. That her redemption will be founded in carrying on the name of her deceased husband and the name of her now current husband, Boaz. That in order for Naomi and Ruth alike to have the name go on, they had to have a child. That redemption was only partial. She didn't have all the rights to Boaz's stuff until she gave Boaz a son. This is very important. Redemption, the kinsman redeemer, the main purpose of a relationship in a kinsman redeemer was to reproduce. So if this story ends here, there's no redemption. This story ends here. You've got a nice little wedding happening, but there's no children. Now, I want to remind you, in chapter 1, we see that she was married to Mahlon for 10 years and had no children. Remember that? So these next words bring everything together. Notice what it says. And he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception. Notice who gave her conception. Who did it? The Lord did. And she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you is more to you than 7 sons, and she has given birth to him. Now, what I want to do for a moment is I want to pull back the curtain. I want to pull back, and I want to look at something that's happening in this passage and kind of bring this back to our lives. Because there's something deep happening behind the scenes that you and I miss with our Western English minds that we would just kind of skip over and be a no big deal. So what I want to do, I want to pull back the curtain for a moment. I want us to look backstage at the story, and I want to see how beautiful this is. I want to think of how beautiful this is in regards to what's happening. First of all, I mentioned at the beginning of this series on Ruth that names were very, very important. In fact, the idea of having your name continue was everything. Anonymity was looked at as judgment. If your name doesn't continue and you're anonymous, it means you're under the judgment of God in their mindset. Now, we live in a world where it really, whether our name goes on or not, it's not a real bother to us. We've kind of lost those traditions of naming our sons and, there are some of us that have those traditions, but many of us, it's just kind of whatever, we'll name them whatever they want. They can change it later on as well. But in their day, it was everything. But for you and I, it's the same thing, by the way. You and I are hardwired for purpose. You and I are hardwired with the need to want to carry on. To me, it's a morbid thing. I hit 35 just a month ago, and it hit me like, man, I'm getting close. I'm halfway to death, pretty much. Right? I'm almost there. And it kind of hit me a little bit. I was thinking about my age. I'm thinking about how, I'm 35. I'm getting a little bit older. And yet, I did a funeral yesterday for a family in our church. They had a mom pass away, 52 years old. I mean, young. And I'm thinking, man, that's right around the corner. I mean, it's not that far away. And it's weird that we put people on the ground and we forget them. Like, how many of us can actually name our great-great-great-great-grandparents? Anybody? And yet they lived, yet they were important, yet they did something. But probably very few of us even remember them. See, in their day, this idea of carrying on the name was so important. Being anonymous was being judged. You and I, we're hardwired that way, but we've kind of given up on it. We're just like, forget it, My kids, hopefully they just make it, right? We say things like that, by the way, parents. We're like, I just hope my kids can survive, right? As if times are a lot harder today than they were back then. And you read this, hopefully it reminds us that times are the same. There's nothing new under the sun. Wickedness always has prevailed, has not always prevailed, but it has prevailed pretty heavily. And it continues to prevail, right? We see that. But this idea of being hardwired with purpose, that we're hardwired to we want to continue, we want to see significance matter, right? In fact, the rabbis had a saying. Instead of cursing people, this is what they would say. They wouldn't curse at somebody, they would say this line. This was written in rabbinical writings, and they said this. This is what they said when they went to curse somebody. They said this: may your seed die and your name perish. You want to make an insult at somebody, you would say, may your seed die and may your name perish. In other words, may you not continue. May your line die out. May there be nobody to take on your name. May you be forgotten. Now, why I want to share that. This is important to this story, and then we're going to connect this to the Christmas story. Take a look at verse 1. So here is Boaz at the city gate. He sees the other redeemer. What does he say to him? What does he say? Notice verse 1 there. He says to this other redeemer, turn aside what? Friend. What's interesting, this is not the word friend in Hebrew. And why I'm telling you this is because our English doesn't really have a word to describe this. It's kind of insulting. It's a poetical term. Here's what it literally says, and you and I in our modern English can say this, but in interpreters, it was hard to kind of put it in there this way, so they did it with this word friend. Hey, friend, come here. But literally what this is saying here is, hey, what's your name? Hey, so-and-so. Hey, this and that, whoever you are, come here, come over here. That's literally what this is saying. Hey, so-and-so, come on over. Now, follow. Did Boaz know who this was? Did Boaz research and know who the Redeemer was? Yeah, we find in chapter 3, he already knew who the Redeemer was, that he somehow went to Ancestry.com and saw that this was the Redeemer. Yet he doesn't call him by his name. Why? Well, some believe because the writer of the book of Ruth is making a point that Boaz realized that he was not going to redeem her because she's a Moabite. And so he was saying that he was missing out on his name being perpetuated by the Lord. Very interesting why he doesn't call him by his name. Instead, he says, hey, so-and-so, come here. Yeah, we're relatives. I mean, listen, I don't know if you have a cousin maybe you don't like or something, but you don't go up to him and say, hey, yo, what's up? Right? Usually you call them by the name. Or if you're in the grocery store and you don't want to see them, you walk down the other aisles to not, hey, so-and-so, or you'll do this, You'll be like, hey, what was their name? Can you tell me what was their name? Do you remember them? If you have a long-lost cousin somewhere. I mean, you're in West Virginia, they call that your wife, but that I did not plan that. That was not in the second service. I'm just telling you. Sorry, bad West Virginia joke. Now, notice he doesn't even call him by his name. I think it's an important point here. He's saying, your name's not going to carry on. Notice verse 5, right? Here's why Boaz wants to redeem. Here's why. In order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. Notice it goes on. The other redeemer says, no, I'm not going to do this. Why? Lest I impair my own inheritance. The word there literally is my own namesake. Lest I hinder my name. I'm not going to redeem her. Boaz goes and redeem her. Why? Verse 10. I have bought her to be my wife to perpetuate the name of the dead. The name of the dead may not be cut off. How do they respond? They respond to him by saying, notice verse 11. At the end of verse 11, may you act worthily in Ephrathah and may your name be known. The word renowned means name be known. May your name be known in Bethlehem. Wait a minute. What are they saying? Do you see the play? Name, name, name. Everything comes down to whose name matters. Who matters? Whose name's on the stocking? This is the end of the book right here. Think about this. Go down to verse 14. Then the women said to Naomi, now here's Naomi who lost her husband and 2 sons. Blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. Why did God, in the middle of a time of judgment, pick a Moabite, allow a family to go Moab out of disobedience, judge them for that, but takes this woman who clung to her mother-in-law, has her marry a redeemer who just happens to be a worthy man, has them get married through this action of redemption. Then they bear a son. By the way, I love that the women, it goes on and says the women call the son Obed. Obed means worship. It means a servant of worship. All of this has to do with who? Notice verse 14. Blessed be the Lord who has not left you without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned. Whose name is it? It's the Lord's. This all comes back to being about the name of God, the name of the Lord, that he would be praised, that he would be blessed, that he would be known. Think about the time of the judges, and God says, hey, God has not forgotten the people of Israel. God has not forgotten Naomi in her sorrow. God has brought a redeemer. God has brought a Boaz. Who's redeemed her. And the baby has brought redemption. In fact, I love what it goes on. We have 2 endings. This is like your bonus features on your DVD. It ends by saying, and the woman in the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi, verse 17, and they named him Obed, which means servant of worship, and he was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Everybody knows King David, right? David who killed Goliath. We come to verse 18. We have a secondary ending, a little more details. Now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. And Jesse fathered David. You go to Matthew chapter 1. Guess how it begins? It says this exact words. These exact words are found at the beginning of the book of Matthew as you read the Christmas story. And 30 generations after Ruth will come the Messiah, Jesus Christ. God uses a Moabite woman with a worthy man to redeem mankind, to redeem Israel for himself, to redeem mankind through a baby that would come through their line. She is the 28th great-grandmother of Jesus Christ. Think about that. Think about it. Let's just be honest for a moment. How many times have we heard the Christmas story? How many times? Well, we've heard it probably thousands of times, haven't we? I mean, as a kid, maybe you're like me. You grew up and you even did the plays. For unto us a child is born. Unto us a son is given. Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace among men. And we fly away, right? We've all been in there. We've done these things. We've memorized these things. Here's the problem. Familiarity can be a hindrance. Familiarity can be a hindrance to the beauty and the depth of this story of Christmas. Think about it, folks. Think about it for a moment. You and I are Ruth. You and I are the Moabite. We're rejected. We're enemies. In fact, the scripture says you and I are at enmity with God. We are enemies of God because of sin. Think about it. God originally owned us, right? He made us. When you create something, you own it, don't you? Today we have these rights called, you got to have copyright laws, right? You can't, if it's yours, if you create it, if you're the original, it's yours, you own it. And then what happens? You begin to sell that if you want, but it's yours. God originally made us and owned us. But we rebelled against him. We became his enemy because of sin. We chose against him. All of us have fallen short of the glory of God. Sin means to miss the mark. We are constantly missing the mark in our lives. We are Ruth. We are the Moabite. We are wicked and an enemy of God himself. So what does God do? God was able to redeem us, but was he willing? 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years after this story in Ruth, he demonstrated that he was both able and willing. And he did it in the form of a baby and a manger. And I've asked this question in my own mind many, many times. Why a baby? Like if I was planning this thing out right, I would have zapped down and I would have been like, I'm God, all right? I'm going to die on the cross for you tomorrow. I'm going to walk out of the grave in 3 days and I'm going back. If you want me, you can have me. That's what I would have done. That would have been my plan. Instead, he comes as a baby in a manger. Yeah, I thought about it. Why a baby? Why that way? I think it was to demonstrate to us his love. Now think about it. If God shows up and says to you and I love you. I love you. Here's two reactions that we have. By the way, over 200 times in the Old Testament, God tells Israel, I love you. And what do? They slap in his face. They spit in his face. Why? Because when we hear somebody loves us, we do two reactions. This is our sinful tendency. It's for some of us goes like this. We go like, of course you love us. Why wouldn't you love this? And this is exactly what, I should be the one. You don't love them, love me. No, I'm serious, right? We react this way. Or we react by saying, God, there's no way that you will love me. There's no way. God, I'm a sinner. There's no way. God, I don't even believe that. God, you're just out of you're off your rocker, your throne, your rocker, you're off of it today. I mean, God, take your medication that you created. There's no way that you love me. There's no way. And what happens? We reject him both ways. So the only reason God comes as a baby, I believe, is to demonstrate the most lovable thing that you can have on the face of the earth. He comes in the most tender way that isn't glorious, although glory was shown through the angels. It was dirty. It was messy. It was smelly. It was horrible. And he came as the most humblest of form. Think about it. Like, I don't know if you have kids, you know what I'm talking about when I say this. Like, when I see babies now, my heart kind of melts because I remember what it was like to have a baby. Now they're 13, 12, 9, and 7. And I got to tell you, man, when they were babies, I couldn't wait till they grew up. And now that they're growing up, I wish they were babies again. I was over the other day at Bill and Tina Morris' house. Bill's mom passed away, and so I was over there. We were talking about the funeral yesterday and how we could best do everything and trying to help them through that process. And I remember they were there with their two little girls. They have an 8-month-old, I believe she's 8 months, and a 2-year-old. And these are as cute as could be. I mean, they have these big blue eyes, and at first they're all shy, and I start to, hey, give me 5, give me 5. Start trying to get them to like me, okay, make silly faces and things. And so finally at the end, they were like, playing, and I was like, man, Bill, you better be careful, buddy. I said, I'm here for like, an hour and a half, and I can tell you, they can rap pretty quickly, those cute little girls. I said, Bill, you got trouble waiting ahead, man. They're going to grow up fast, man, and cherish this moment. You know what I mean, right, parents? Your kids begin to grow up. Listen, isn't this what God did? God says, I'm going to come as the most lovable picture you can ever face to show that I'm willing. He was able and he was willing. It says he came, right? He lived for 30 some odd years. And then he died on the cross. That baby that was lovable, cuddly, cute, died on a cross. He grew up and he died on a cross. And by his blood, it says that we find redemption. He was the highest bidder to buy us. There was no other bidder to be our Redeemer. Listen, why was he born in a manger? Why did he live a 30-some-odd-year life? So that he could say, I am a kinsman. I am just like you. I'm not just God, I'm a kinsman. I'm a man, fully man. I know the pains of this earth. I know the temptations that you face. In fact, I love that on the cross, he took sin. That means he knows even my sinful struggles. He died for them, and he took them on himself. He came to say, I'm a kinsman of yours. but he also proved himself to be God. See, a kinsman could not redeem me. It had to be a perfect kinsman. So he showed himself to be God by 3 days later, walking out of the grave to say, listen, I am worthy enough. I am worthy enough to do this. I have done this for you. I am a kinsman, and I am able to redeem you. His death on the cross proclaimed that he was the highest bidder of our lives. Folks, you can't buy redemption. Redemption is all about the one who redeems. Redemption is all about the Redeemer. It's all about the one who has bought us. Redemption is not a commodity to get something else. Redemption is what we need. Exactly. Redemption is what we get. It's him. It's the Redeemer. Ruth got Boaz, and with that came a child where she would find redemption. For you and I, it was in a child that we found our redemption. Galatians 4 says it this way. It says, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law so that we might receive adoptions. Why did he come? Why did he come at this moment? Why did he come 2,000 years ago? Why did he come? To redeem, to buy us back. He who originally owned us and we rebelled against him. He came as a baby in a manger to say, I'm willing to redeem. I'm a kinsman, I'm a man, and I'm a redeemer. I'm God. And he came to redeem us and make us sons and daughters of his. Think about that. Listen, if you are bought twice, you are forever owned. If you were bought twice, you're forever owned. You were bought the moment you were born. God owned you. Sin separates us, right? We were born with that sin. God made us. He owned us. We denied that ownership. But if we're willing to allow him to redeem us, he is willing to buy us again. We're forever owned. And the reason for that is found in Philippians 2. Why does God do this? Why God does the Christmas story? Why did God do that? Why? Here's why. Philippians 2. Have this mind among us, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who though he was in the form of God, did not count it equality with God a thing to be grasped, but he emptied himself. The word there, kenosis, means he veiled himself. He emptied a part of him, and many people believe it's his glory. And here's the adverse of that. He took the form of a servant. Remember Ruth? How does she begin? She began in Ruth chapter 2 telling Boaz, I'm a stranger, I'm a foreigner. I'm a servant, I'm a slave. He became a slave, being born in the likeness of men. And we found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even the death on the cross. Why? Why did God do that for us? Why did God buy us in this way? Why was he the highest bidder? Well, it tells us. Therefore, he has been given a name above every name. He has been highly exalted and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is the Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Why did God come at Christmas? Why did God die on the cross? Why did God rise again? Not for us. He redeemed us for himself. You know what I love about Boaz? Why did Boaz redeem? It says 3 times, to perpetuate the name of the dead. God redeemed us for his own glory so that his name would be exalted. This story of Ruth is all about the exaltation of the name of Jesus Christ, the name of God, who is the Redeemer, who did not forget to redeem. I love, Isaiah 9, it says that his name will be Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father. What is Christmas all about? It's all about his name. His name. This morning there are 2 people here, 2 types of people. There are 2 sets of people this morning. There are those of us, maybe you're here, you don't know Christ. You know the stories, but you've never been bought by him. See, Ruth could have went back to Moab. Orpah missed redemption because she went back to her people. Ruth clung to this hope that she had, that she could be redeemed, that somehow this is all going to work out, that God was in control. This morning, you have to be satisfied that he is your Redeemer, that he has paid a price that has been worthy of your life. You know why people reject Christ? You know why they don't follow Christ? Here's why people don't accept Christ, is they don't value what he's done for them. If we don't get the depth of what he did, if we don't see how sinful we are and there's no hope of redemption and that he came to redeem us, then we miss the entire purpose of the Christmas story. And there are some of you, maybe you're here and you know these stories, but you have never put your faith in the Redeemer. You have never allowed him to buy you back. He's offered the price, he's able, and he's willing. And the question is, will you take him? Will you accept him? There's some of you here, you know Christ this morning. You know Christ, you've accepted him, but listen, here's the question. Are you trying to take ownership back in any area of your life? Like this whole idea of a kinsman redeemer means the moment she had the baby, she had everything. The land became hers. It's her son's. Everything. She gets everything because she has produced through this baby her redemption. Listen, for you and I, it was through that baby that came 2,000 years ago that we find redemption through his death, through his resurrection. And the question is, are you allowing him to have ownership of every area of your life? Are you holding back with your finances? Are you holding back with your efforts? Are you holding back with your talents? Are you holding back with your time? Are you holding back areas of your life as if you owned it? No. You have been bought with a price. I have been bought with a price. It says, therefore, glorify God in my body and my spirit. You know what? I love that word glorified because it's the root word in Hebrew is obed. Obed. Worship. Glory. Glory in the name of Christ. It's the name of the son that Ruth and Boaz gave, that the women gave. Worship. Are you owning your life or is he owning your life as Christians? See, the Christmas story is not about buying a gift. It's not even about receiving the gift. It's about allowing that gift to own you. It's allowing God to have ownership as our kinsman redeemer. I remember hearing this story a few years ago. It's about a little boy. This little boy was in Atlanta, and he was an orphan who had been, his parents had died, and he had been adopted by his grandmother. And it was the week before Christmas, and the next door neighbor, they lived in row houses, and the next door neighbor lived across the alley from them, and he had smelled a kind of a horrible smell. It smelled like something was burning, and he looks around his house, doesn't see anything on fire, and so he runs outside and looks, and his neighbor's house is on fire. He hears a scream, yelling in the background, kind of a distant noise, and he looks up on the third level, and he sees the little boy that was adopted by his grandmother, hanging out the window, crying for help as smoke was billowing out. Here to find out that grandmother had died trying to save her grandson, trying to get to him. This man didn't know what to do. It's 3 stories up. He didn't have a ladder that high, and so he did the only thing he knew how to do, and that was, as a kid, he remembered he would climb back and forth on these buildings, because kids do crazy things, and he would climb an old iron pipe up the side of these houses. And so he went over and he touched the iron pipe that were along this row house, and it was as hot as could be as the fire was whipping and starting to heat up this metal pipe. But he grabbed on and he began to climb up this metal pipe, and he got to the top, and this little boy grabbed to his neck and wouldn't let go, and he got him down to the bottom and just cared for him and caressed him. Well, later on, they took this little boy, and they had to figure out where he was going to live. He was an orphan now. His grandmother had died. His parents were gone. There was nowhere for him to be, and so they took him to orphan court, where they were going to decide where he was going to stay. Was it a foster care program? Where was he going to be? And so the week of Christmas, they're making a decision where this boy would be. There were 3 people that showed up. One was his teacher. A teacher said, listen, I'll take him. I'll take this little boy. The second one was actually the mayor of the city. The mayor came and said, listen, I'll take him from out. I mean, what a great story here, right? And so there was questions whether this was a political move or not, the mayor of Atlanta taking this boy. The third one was a wealthy man, one of the wealthiest men in the city there. And he came and he said, I'm a business owner. I got money. I can take care of this boy. I'll make sure he gets to college and all that. And then it walked in the neighbor. And that moment, that little boy made eye contact with the neighbor, and he goes up running. And he jumps into the arm of this neighbor that saved his life. And it became abundantly clear to the judge that the man with the burnt hands had earned the right to keep the son. Folks, that's the story of redemption. The man with the scarred hands is worthy to own us. The man with the scarred hands has been the highest bidder. He's our kinsman redeemer. And the question is, will we give him ownership of our lives? Let's stand together as we pray.